When I first started doing talks on Photoshop, in those early days, most people would be taking pictures using the JPEG file format rather than a RAW. And there were reasonable reasons why they were doing that. Storage space was very expensive, memory cards were small, so they had to economize on what they could do. But these days, all of those excuses are not valid anymore. And again, these days, most people I'd ask in the camera club will now say that they use raw capture rather than JPEG. But I think it's useful just to remind ourselves why we have this difference and why it's best to use raw files rather than JPEGs. The two main reasons are bit depth, which is the tonal range difference between what you can get in a raw file compared to a JPEG file, and the amount of color information also contained is far greater in a raw file than a JPEG. Now in this demonstration I'd like to try and show you the difference between the JPEG and the RAW. Now these two images here, both taken in camera and captured as a JPEG and a RAW file. I've subsequently changed the Canon RAW file to a DNG purely so it can open up on your own computer if you wish to follow along on these demonstrations. We're in Bridge at the moment, so I'll just click on the raw file, and it's useful just to have a look here in the metadata. You can see that it's got untagged here. That means that it's got no color space applied to it at present. It's an open book at present. It's an RGB red, green, blue image, and it has a bit depth of 14-bit. Now that is the bit depth of my camera. If we click on the JPEG file, you can see that it's got an embedded color space of sRGB. That's the default color space for a JPEG file in my camera. I can change it to Adobe 1998, but I left it at the default there. And also you can see the bit depth is 8-bit. Another interesting little thing is if we just click back on the raw file, we can see that the actual file size is 25 megabytes. Okay. Now this contains thousands of times more tonal information than a JPEG. But if I click on the JPEG is just under half as small. So the difference in file size isn't that significant when you consider the amount of information, extra information that we get in a raw file. Now I'm going to open both of these up into Photoshop. So JPEG's selected, shift click the raw file, and when I press Control and open 0, so that's the O, not the 0, O, the JPEG will open up into the Photoshop workspace, but the raw file, because it's a raw file, has to open via Adobe Camera Raw, and here we are in Camera Raw. Now I'm not going to adjust any of the sliders at all, but what I will do is just go to the workflow options at the bottom. I'm going to leave the bit depth at 16 bits. That will preserve all the tonal information and color information in that raw file. But I'm going to change the color workspace from my preferred ProPhoto RGB to sRGB, so it's the same color space as the JPEG, because I don't want the issue of different color spaces becoming a concern, so that both the raw file and the JPEG file will have the same assigned color space. So the only difference will be the bit depth when I open it up into Photoshop. Okay, so now you can see at the bottom it's sRGB, 16 bits per channel, will be opened into Photoshop. And here we have it. So that's the raw file. I'll just Control 0 to magnify it to full size. Control 0. And that's Control O. Control 0. There we go. Now what I like to do is just draw your attention to the histogram, because that's going to be important. So I'm just going to change the colors to RGB. So it's just a monochrome histogram, and I'm going to regenerate it There we go. So that's showing you the tonal values within that file. Select the raw file, same again, and again we've got a very similar histogram. And when you switch between them two, there's very little difference. It's just the way the JPEG file was processed through an automatic process in the camera, and this is just Adobe's automatic interpretation of the raw file. Now what I want to do is compress the tonal range in this image and then expand it out again. Now this is going to be a very destructive process, and it's throwing away loads and loads of information. And I want to apply the same process to both images. So I'm going to work on the raw file for a start, and I'm going to record everything I do so I can then apply the same treatment, exact same treatment, to the JPEG file. So I'm going to use the Actions panel here, and I've created some of my own actions here. I've got one called Demos folder here, and what I'm going to do is start a new action, create a new action, select here, we'll get the new action palette there, and I'm going to call this Trash, because that's basically what we're going to do to the image. Click on Record, and we can see that the record button is now highlighted. So anything I do will be added under that Trash folder there. Okay. So we're working on the raw file for a start. I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and just off screen I'm going to go to Levels. Okay, bring in the levels there. And in here I'm going to the output levels, I'm going to type in 130. And if we just look across to the histogram, we can see that all the information has now been squeezed from the left towards the center. In here again, the output, I'm going to go 132. And if we look in the histogram, again, the right hand side has also been squeezed into the middle. So the entire picture, instead of occupying from 0 to 255, it's now squeezed into 130 to 132. You could have chosen any sort of arbitrary range along here, but I've chosen a difference of 2 to really emphasize what we're doing. Select OK, and we can see that that levels adjustment has been added to the actions under Trash. Now you probably won't be able to see anything, but that there is still a very vague image there. The whole image has been it's so lacking in detail, it is just a grey mass. So the idea is we've gone and got rid of all the potential information here and there, and it's all been squeezed into the center. We can now, I'll just regenerate the histogram, we're now going to expand it back out to fill the entire histogram. And go to Image, Auto Contrast. Okay, we'll just do that once more. Image, Auto Contrast. Okay, and I'm now going to stop the action. Regenerate the histogram, and you can see we've gone back to our previous sort of shape histogram, but this time we've got one or two white spikes here. Okay, and each one of those white spikes means that there is absolutely no tonal information at that spot along the histogram. Now, but the image still looks okay, even though we've subjected it to a tremendous trashing process. I'm now going to go to the JPEG image, and notice there's very little difference there. Going to go to the Trash action and press play, and that same levels has been applied to the JPEG file. I'll just regenerate the histogram, and we can see here that all we're left with is one spike on the far right, which gives you pure white or pure color, one mid-tone in all three color channels, and pure black on the left. So we've only got 3 tones in the entire image, and 3 colors as well. And hopefully you can see the difference between the end result of heavily editing a RAW file compared to a JPEG captured in camera at the same time. So although you wouldn't do this to a normal image, hopefully, any sort of editing that you do on any file will be destructive in some sort of way. So if you can start off with a 16-bit image or 14-bit image, you're going to end up with a far better quality image than if you only start off with an 8-bit image.